ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all. It's my pleasure to have each and every one of you here with us at this beautiful venue, the Catholic Club. It's indeed an honor to welcome the Woman of the Hour, Miss Harini, with us. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm equally pleased to welcome some of our regular patrons of Ibrowse, as well as some of the newer ones. A warm welcome to you all. It's great to see you all coming, and please keep coming in large numbers. It's not every day that we gather to sit under one roof and discuss murder and mayhem. Is that so? So great, warm welcome to all of you all. I'm hoping you all have brought in your thinking hats and magnifying glasses. I now hand over proceedings to Tessa.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce the author for the day, Ms. Harini Nagendra. Is this better? Yeah, okay. I'd like to introduce the author of the day, Ms. Harini Nagendra. Harini Nagendra is a professor of ecology at Asim Premji University. Her previous books include Nature in the City, Bangalore in the Past, Present and Future, and Trees in Indian Cities. The book Trees in Indian Cities won the Book of the Year at the Publishing Next Awards in 2020. The Bangalore Detectives Club is her first crime fiction novel. Harini lives in Bangalore with her family in a home filled with maps. She loves trees, mysteries, and traditional recipes. Welcome, Harini, to today's event.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be.
I'd like to introduce the moderator for the day, Ms. Iona Miskita. Iona has been a media and market research professional. While she chose economics over literature in her student life, she's now making up for it. She's a voracious reader, constantly devouring books, reading different genres simultaneously. Currently a stay-at-home mom to 3 teenagers, she counts among her greatest achievements the fact that all 3 of them are voracious readers as well. She is actively involved in social and cultural activities and is a past president of the Karnataka Goan Association. We welcome you here, Iona, for today. Thank you. I know we're all eagerly waiting to know more about the book. So before we start, I hand it over to Iona. I'd like to introduce the book to everybody. Could I just know with a show of hands, how many of you all have read the book? Okay, I'm sure after this, the rest of you all will be waiting to get your hands on a book. So today's book, the Bangalore Detective Club, is about a crime that happened here in Bangalore. So I'll just read about the book. Solving crimes isn't easy. Add a full-length sari, a jealous mother-in-law, and the disapproving glare of high society into the mix, and you've got a problem. When clever, headstrong Kaveri moves to Bangalore to marry handsome young Dr. Ramu, she's resigned herself to a quiet life. But that's not what happens. There is a change at the night of the party at Century Club, where she escapes to the garden for some peace. But she's in for a horror. The party scene turns into a murder scene. When a vulnerable woman is connected to the crime, Kaveri becomes determined to save her and launches a private investigation to find the killer, trace his steps from a lustrous brothel to an Englishman's mansion. She soon finds that sleuthing in the sari isn't as hard as it seems when you have talent for maths, a head for logic, and a doctor for a husband. And I hand over the mic to Iona to tell us more about the book, and to Harini as well.
Thank you so much, Tessa. What better way to start today than to launch straight into the book? So I'm going to invite Harini to do the first of the readings that she has chosen for us today.
Thank you, Iona. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I'll open with something that starts talking about the book. It's chapter 4, and it takes us into a setting of the Century Club, of course, a lovely old club of Bangalore, like Catholic club. And I think it's a very similar setting, so you might find it interesting. So we'll start with this. A beautiful stranger. Kaveri's gaze took in every inch of her surroundings. The main hall of the Century Club glowed in the yellow light of the electric lamps. The sturdy furnishings of teak and rosewood, offset by the delicate garlands of white jasmine, red roses, and orange marigold, draped around the pillars like serpents. The lamps were particularly impressive, mounted on tall iron pillars, enhanced by ornate cornices and curls. And here as an aside, I'm sorry, this is my professor-teacher/teacher mentality. I can't stop giving you asides. But this book is set in 1921, and I'm not sure if you know that Bangalore was the first city to be electrified in Asia. And so this, the Century Club with the electric lamps is quite new for those times, because many other cities in India were not electrified by those times. Outside, the gentle scritch of a broomstick announced the presence of a gardener sweeping up the fallen leaves from the grassy lawn where dinner would later be laid out. A servant appeared silently on their left-hand side, bowing deferentially as he helped Ramu out of his coat. Ramu tipped the cart driver, telling him to have a good supper and to pick them up in a few hours. The carriage driver nodded cheerfully. His family lived nearby and were expecting him home for dinner. I'll flip ahead a few pages to when Kaveri and Ramu are having dinner with a British couple in the Century Club. Is this your first time at the club? Daphne asked, finally putting down her knife and fork and leaning back with a sigh of satisfaction, which seemed out of place for a woman who had just flounced out of the room in disgust. Kaveri's husband Ramu is a doctor at Bowring Hospital, and Daphne is his boss's wife. We had a wedding reception here 3 years ago, Kaveri said. 3 years ago? Daphne stared at her. You must have been a mere infant. Kaveri bit her lip. How judgmental these English people could be. In my community, we tend to marry early, she explained. My sister was married when she was 12. I wanted to stay in school for as long as I could. So I kicked and screamed, begged and pleaded, and even went on hunger strike to avoid marriage. My mother was aghast, but my father is very fond of me and permitted me to continue my studies. But my mother continued to worry that no one would marry me if I grow too old. So when news arrived of a well-known family from Bangalore, Kaveri gestured at Ramu, lost in an animated conversation about a difficult medical case with Charles Roberts. My mother jumped at the opportunity. My husband wanted to marry an educated girl whom he could talk to about more than rice and chapati dough. He agreed to wait for me to pass my exams before taking me to his home. Good for him, Daphne declared with a flourish, thumping her arm on the table, dangerously close to the water glass. But 16 is still so young. And Rami, how old was he? He was 25. My grandmother insisted we get married quickly. It was just before the end of the war. And she was worried that my husband might be called up. Charles Roberts, who was listening in, nodded. It's the same in England. There was so much risk of people dying during the war that marriages happened quickly. My father-in-law did not believe in child marriage, Kaveri continued. So while the marriage itself was conducted 3 years ago, we only became husband and wife in reality 3 months ago when I completed my studies and moved into Bangalore. I see. So that's why you two remind me so much of a honeymoon couple, looking at each other so fondly and lovingly. Daphne let out a surprisingly loud cackle of laughter. Your lovely wife tells me your wedding reception was held at the same venue, she said to Ramu. Ramu's eyes lit up. My father was one of the founding members. You see, he stopped, looking embarrassed. There's a bunch of stuck-up snobby Brits that wanted Bangalore United Services Club to remain a whites-only club, my dear. Dr. Roberts took over, understanding Ramu's difficulty in saying anything that could cause offense to his boss. That's why they built the Century Club, with the idea that it would be open to all. Kaveri knew from Ramu that Roberts had recently moved to Bangalore from Amritsar, escaping the tense aftermath of the horrific Jallianwala Bagh incident where hundreds of Indians had been massacred. Tensions between the British and Indians had been on the rise since then. Thankfully, Ramu said, Roberts was a different kind of Englishman, interested in Indian customs and quick to make friends. He had formed strong bonds with many of his Indian colleagues and subordinates. It's quite a curious name, Century Club. I suppose it was because it's established at 1900, during the turn of the century? No, on the contrary, it's an aspirational name, referring to the elite and select membership of the club, Roberts explained. In fact, I only got in because I inherited my father's membership, Ramu admitted somewhat sheepishly. It's much the same in England, Daphne said. My husband has his club membership passed on from his father, and my brother uses his father's name to get admission to his club. I often think it's rather hard on those who don't have famous fathers to ease their way into memberships and networks. Ah, well, but that's the nature of society, I suppose, whether in England or here overseas. The desert course was brought in. The Veena player took his place at the same time, and the conversation halted as the guests enjoyed the beautiful experience of the melodious music to the accompaniment of crickets chittering in the night and the soft moonlight casting a magical sheen on the ground. As the Ghatam player reached the end of the performance, his tapping rose to a crescendo. The audience was transfixed. His fingers looked like they were flying through the air. The audience stood up and clapped as the hefty middle aged player threw his baked clay instrument up in the air, caught it in midair, drummed on it, and returned it to its resting place on his stomach and his ample paunch, all without losing a beat. As the percussion reached a crescendo and then dipped, a loud scream rang out. Alarmed voices sounded from the direction of the kitchen, and a woman's voice continued to scream, higher and higher in pitch, until there was a sound of a slap. The scream stopped abruptly, and it was then that the woman started to sob.
So thanks so much for that. And this kind of sets the scene for the mystery, and this is when the murder actually happens. So now I would like to ask Harini, why a crime detective novel?
I don't know. So I suspect it's because this is one of my favorite genres. So I still read voraciously. I always read voraciously ever since I could remember. And I had three favorite genres I read in. So mystery, fantasy, and romance. And as I'm growing older, I find it harder to read romance now because the sort of the trope of the man coming in to save the woman is something that I find harder to deal with as I'm growing older. There are still romances I read though, but it's remained mystery or fantasy. And so I have a desire to write a fantasy someday. But in my day job as an ecologist, I've been studying the history of Bangalore for a long time. And I had a lot of maps and old documents on the history of Bangalore, and I was reading that. And so the idea of the woman detective Kaveri just dropped into my head one day. And then it's almost like she spoke to me saying, she was fully formed. She said, write a book about me. And so what would I write? It couldn't be fantasy. It was very natural for me that it would be an Agatha Christie-esque type of mystery because that's what I love. So
who are your favorite crime novelists?
The golden age crime novels, between the World War I and II, because I think the world was so interesting at that time. It was a time of great change globally, right? Women were stepping out of the houses at the first time. There was all this agitation about women's rights to vote and suffrage. There were, globalization had started. Economies had changed. There was this brief period where we thought that the world was entering this phase of stability. And so a lot of things were going on, technology and commerce and progress. At the same time, ecology was still, intact everywhere. And so it's a beautiful time to set things in. And so obviously Agatha Christie, but also Dorothy Sayers, because I love the literary allusions that she has with Peter Wimsey. And then I don't know if you've read Patricia Wentworth, Miss Silver. There's this entire Miss Silver series, which is really very nice. And it has another elderly lady who solves mysteries. Neo Marsh, so mostly people set in that time. I really love the historical mysteries.
Okay, situate the book. I think we've already done that. On page 15, you mentioned women's dreams were only as big as their husbands' egos. So what went behind putting this in?
I think so that was a big part. I've spoken to so many women of that generation about the dreams that they had and the things they wanted to do and they couldn't. So I'll take my own mother. She did. Both my mother and my mother-in-law, very unusual for their times, went to a hostel and did their undergraduate degrees in botany. And both of them wanted to study and work further. So my mother finished her undergraduate degree and got admission into a medical college, and she wanted to become a doctor. And some of her friends were lawyers and doctors and went on to work. And my mother grew up in Salem. She was the daughter of a doctor. But her mother didn't want her to. She wanted her to get married. And so she got married. My father was in a government job. He moved from place to place. She thought in all her innocence that she could get married and then do a medical degree, become a doctor. And she never could. And she still feels bad about it today. My mother-in-law went on hunger strike. She got married when she was 26, like Kaveri, multiple times. At the 10th, she was supposed to stop and get married. After the 12th, she was supposed to stop and get married. After the 12th, she stayed at home for a year and a half. And then her elder brother said, he felt so bad for her. He convinced her father to let him to let her work. And then she had 3 boys. My husband is the middle boy, 1 year apart. There's no way she could have gone back to work after that. So aunts, various aunts, I've heard of this so much. Women from that generation who had a good life, they love the fact that they could look after their children. But this is a sort of korte, as we say in Kannada. It's a desire that was never fulfilled. So it was very natural for me to write something like this. I wanted to talk about how it was for a woman of those times to actually try to fulfill her dreams. And it's true that they would only if they had a supportive husband.
Okay, so when you write, what is your process like? Does the entire thing come to you, or part of it, or the characters, and then does it evolve as you go on? How does it happen?
It's still evolving, I have to say. So this book, the first idea came in 2007. The book came out in April this year. So it took me 12 years to write. Okay, and partly just because life happens. I have a full job. I have my mother lives with me. My in-laws were with me, and they passed away. So taking care of them. So all. So life gets in the way of trying to do something like writing in your spare time. But also, I didn't know how to write a book. I have to say that. I mean, one way to write a book of this kind, especially mysteries, they need to be plotted, right? The details at the end need to be done differently from the details at the beginning. And I have written a lot from when I was a very young kid, but I've written short stories, and I just start writing. I don't know what I'm going to write about. My pen takes me somewhere, or the typing keyboard takes me somewhere, and I end up finishing it. But this was harder. So I changed the plot completely 3 times. I started with the 1890s, and because of the medical research, I was doing work on public health. Ronald Ross, who was the Nobel Prize winner, who found out about the mosquito causing malaria, so he was the health physician during a time of cholera in Bangalore. And so I had originally murder mystery set in the time of plague and cholera. Yeah. And so I changed that because, as my agent told me, it was too grim a backdrop for a cheerful mystery, and I'm writing a cheerful mystery. If there can be such a thing as a cheerful murder mystery, which is an oxymoron, but there are, mine is definitely cheerful, and so you don't want that backdrop. Yeah, so I changed it 3 times, and then I got my way through this. But book 2, I actually wrote in 2 months, the first draft. And so what I did was I again sat down. I can't outline, but I sat down and wrote a 20-page summary of the book. And that really, so it's like a short thing, which I then expanded into the book. Yes. So I think that's what I'm going to follow in book 3, but we'll see.
Okay. So how many books do you envisage for Kaveri?
I can write a lot. So I have a 3-book contract with Little Brown in the UK. And so and the US company which publishes it, Pegasus in the US, has also just taken book 3. So I know 3 for sure. But Little Brown is interested in 3 more. And I can keep writing them. I have a lot of ideas and a lot of visions for Kaveri. I would like to take her all the way to being a grandmother, and so the whole evolution of her trajectory.
I'm sure we're all going to love that, going by the first book. Okay, food. Yes. There are delightful descriptions in the book about food. I think local Kannadika recipes, and there's a collection of recipes at the back of the book. So how did you select the recipes that went into this?
Yeah, that was hard. So I knew again the book would have food. I love culinary mysteries. So, I'm very obsessed with traditional recipes. So I try and note them down from different places. That at some point I want to do a cookbook of all the different influences that come to Bangalore, from of all the different communities that have settled in Bangalore. So I knew food would be there. But I'm also writing this book for a mixed audience, India specifically, but also the US and also the UK. So then we had a lot of back and forth discussions about what is it that I could give people that they could cook easily there. And that on the other hand, and someone from here would not look at it and say, why are you telling me about how to do a recipe for this? Yeah. So that's how I came up to, the bisi bere baat. I thought I would do an entire meal. So if you're in the West and you want to do something with a starter and a main course idea, you can do that with a little dessert. And you even have majjige, which you can add vodka with if that's your preference.
Okay, I want to read a little bit from page 6. Yeah. Next Sunday was here, and Kaveri was humming, albeit under her breath, as she removed her bangles, earrings, and chains and carefully deposited them in a golden silk pouch. She took hold of her long black braided hair and fastened it in a knot on her head. Then, Grabbing the delicate pleats of fabric in each hand, she hiked her sari up past her ankles, tucking the ends between her legs and tying them into a knot under her petticoat. Catching sight of herself in the long mirror, she giggled. This style reminded her of the advertisement of Oriental harem pants she had seen in a glossy English magazine called Vogue, and one of the souvenirs Ramu had brought home from London after his medical studies. She normally wore an 8-yard sari in the modern fashion, wound around her lower body, pleats fanning out from her waist, but that would never do for swimming. She gave herself one last look in the mirror and left the room. So delightful swimming in a sari. How did you research this bit?
So it came from two real life incidents. One is my friend Ashwini, her mother, that I was interviewing for one of my previous books, was then 90 and had saved a park in Jayanagar, and she was the single mother of 10 children. So very quite an amazing woman. So Honama Govindaya, she used to go swimming in a sari. And so I had her in my mind. And my husband's aunt in Madras, who's 96 now, played tennis in a sari and went swimming in a sari, because that was simply what women did in those days. So for me, it was very natural that women would go swimming in a sari. And then I was thinking, how would you swim if the sari, the whole thing would float up. And then I thought, what? My grandmother used to wear the kache sari, the kind that you take and plug. So I said, okay, let me think of Kaveri wearing a kache sari, because she's probably at the time that people changed to wearing this modern style of the sari that we do. And so that's what.
I love that bit. It was delightful. Okay, it would be remiss of me to not talk about your books on ecology. And there have been 4. If those of you who've heard the introduction, Harini has 4 books. Okay, so can you please tell us a little about those books?
Sure, actually 5. So let me.
Okay.
So 2 are academic edited books. One is on reforesting landscapes and one is on urban ecology, and they're more academic books. But my popular books are 3 apart from this. So there's Nature in the City, Bangalore in the Past, Present, and Future, which talks about the history of Bangalore from its ecology. And it actually goes from the 5th century AD onwards, looking at inscriptions and trying to understand how the landscape of the city existed in the 5th century onwards to now. And that book is Oxford University Press. And it is available, by the way, in Blossoms and a few other places still. It was published in 2016. So that was the first sort of popular book that I wrote. The second is written with Seema Mundoli, my colleague from Azim Premji University, and it's called Cities and Canopies, Trees in Indian Cities. And it's got vignettes. It's short chapters, 2-3 pages each, on either a tree, a very famous tree that we see in cities, or a little interesting aspect of trees. It could be trees in art and music. It could be trees that you climb, or it could be trees as invaders or trees as locals. Should we get an invasive tree, or is a rain tree or a eucalyptus bad just because it came from outside? So I pick a theme like that, and then we talk about that. So these short chapters, and there are recipes there also. There are riddles, there are poems. So we made it a book for tree lovers of all kinds. So that's Cities and Canopies. And then we have a little book that is a children's book called So Many Leaves, which is published by Pratham. So that's a book that's also available online. It's a little picture book for children about different kinds of leaves. Some are small, some are big, with gorgeous illustrations. So that's So Many Leaves. And I'm just now finishing up the last bits of work on a book again for Penguin, which is on water in cities. Again, water as transport, water as worship, water as chemistry, water as ecology, all the different facets of water in little chapters. So I think in the time of floods, this is really important for us, understanding how we think of water, how we relate to water.
So that actually leads to my next question. Through all your studies, can you tell us what are the imminent dangers we face in Bangalore? Because a lot of your work is on urban development. So can you very briefly tell us about that?
I think one of the biggest game changers is going to be climate change. As we've seen, we've had so much rain. The next 5 days, we're going to have more rain. So we're going to get more unpredictable rainfall in more intense periods of time. It's not that the amount of rainfall necessarily might change so much, but if you get a lot of rain and it comes in a very short amount of time, it's landing on concrete as opposed to wetlands and lakes, it's rushing past, and therefore we're going to have floods and damage and things like that. And fortunately, this part of the city is relatively well protected. I am in Sarjapur Road next to the infamous Rainbow Drive that many of you have been sharing stories about. My friends and neighbors are there, where you're actually taking boats and tractors and boats. And if you have an elderly person in the house or someone who needs to get to the hospital, it's frightening. See, this is the worst. We can talk about climate change and global warming, But what we don't realize is it's not the warming as much that is going to affect us as these kinds of extreme flooding events. And that's really what we have to gear up.
Any steps we as at an individual level can take to help the situation?
I think some things are very clear. We need to plant more trees. We need to restore our lakes, restore our water bodies. So I think the first thing is to just get groups of people together. Where is your waste going? For instance, you might not be, maybe where you are, you don't have flooding, but maybe your waste is going to a lake site outside the city and that's creating flooding there. So where is your waste going? Can you plant more trees in this region? What can you do as a group? I think if we all work together as communities, then MLAs, MPs, our corporators land up listening to us. If we go as one or two people, we don't get that much attention. So that is really the biggest thing I have seen, that if people get together as groups and do something, then there's a lot of positive momentum.
Okay, you have another reading for us?
Yes. So I'll do a shorter one. Yeah. So a short one that I wanted to take you through was to Alsur, and it's a very different place, but somewhere that's close by. So just give me a second.
I think I also had marked that. Page 118.
Yes. Yeah. The cart passed by Halsur Lake with calm waters, cows grazing, and women washing clothes at the water's edge. It presented a beautiful panorama. Uma Auntie pointed out the army barracks at the far end of the lake, next to which the landscaped Kensington Park Gardens formed a scenic strip. Kaveri stared at a woman standing in front of a large boulder with two baskets heaped with cow dung at her side. She was shaping the fresh dung into small balls and throwing them with an expert flick of her wrist onto the boulder, where the dung flattened out into a chapati-shaped patty, sticking to the rock with ease. She'll come back in the evening and remove these once they're dried, and then take them for sale to the local market to use as fuel, Uma Auntie explained as the horse plodded along the slippery mud lanes, strewn with banana peels, discarded flowers, and dung of various kinds: dog, human, donkey, and pig. The horse's hooves clopped across a muddy kacha road. Kaveri's sari received a splattering of mud as they moved over a puddle. The women held their saris higher around their calves to keep the hems from getting dirty.
So I love that description of Halasuru, especially because it's an area that we all know. All of us live around this place, and how different it was 100 years ago. You had cattle being brought, and you had, the description is fascinating, and all of you really must pick up the book. Okay, so with that, I think we can throw the session open to questions from the audience. Yeah? Any of you have any general questions for? Ooh. You'll have material for your next book. Gavin, you are the one with the questions. Come back out now. Yeah, Naveen. Gavin, questions?
Yeah, one question. In fact, it's based on what you read out just now. You talk about the Bangalore United Services Club being the first club mainly for the British, and therefore Century Club came into being. In between, when the two protagonists are taking a drive through town, they passed by Bowring Institute. Isn't Bowring Institute much older than Century Club? And if that's the case, what was it for? What people was it for?
So it was also a British club, but mostly for officers. So it was there, but Century Club was the first one which was mixed and for the Indians or the natives. And Vishweshwara actually started it because he was not allowed into Bangalore Club, right? So he started it.
Hi, I've written to you. I'm a member of Citizens Action Forum, and we are deeply, deeply grateful to you for all the support you gave us on water. So I'm sure the club members would be happy to know that our PIL on water was admitted by the High Court last week.
I just heard from Vijay. Yes.
So thank you so much.
I'm so glad.
Because you gave us a lot of support and a lot of insights into water.
I'm so glad. Why the 1920s? So originally it was written in the 1890s. Two reasons I moved it to the 1920s. One is there's much more material on the 1920s, and 1890s, the archival record is thin. So I have less to imagine. But the 1920s is also so much richer to write about. I could write about Century Club, which didn't exist. I could write about the saris, chiffon and georgette saris and the jewelry that came in again, which is all very different. So it's just a richer and more lush. Kaveri could drive a car and she drives a car, she has a Ford. So cars obviously didn't exist. Lights existed. So she can do her calculus late in the night when her mother-in-law doesn't see her. Her mother-in-law thinks too much studying makes a woman's brains go soft. So she has to do her maths in secret. So there's so much I could do with the 1920s and still retain the flavor of a historical book. So.
Any other questions, even comments on the book?
Then I'll comment again.
Yeah.
It was, I've read many books where you get maps of the city in the beginning. So first time I read a book of a place I knew. And yet when I read the book, I realize I don't really know Bangalore like it's shown in the book. It's so different there.
Thanks. That's really nice to know.
I read about your house being covered with maps. What's this about?
Yes. So I study, a lot of my work is on old maps to understand how the city has changed. So I have old maps. I have maps from the 1890s. I have maps from 1920s and 30s, all on my wall, on my office wall. Yeah, and I have downstairs in my basement some Russian spy maps of Vizag and Bombay, which I picked up in the US. And they actually have my husband's house. So there were 3 houses in a particular hill in Vizag. And I picked them up because they have the 3 houses on the hill in the 1970s marked. And this was with spy satellites. So yes, I have a house full of maps and I love maps.
Can you tell us anything about the book to come after this one without spoilers?
Yes, I can tell you one thing. So Kaveri has her mother-in-law and she do not get along, putting it mildly, at the beginning of the book. Because Ramu, her husband, asked for an educated wife, but her mother-in-law doesn't believe in all the studying. And so Kaveri has to do studying in secret. And so I had the mother-in-law, but then she had to go because she wouldn't allow Kaveri to do all the sleuthing. So very conveniently, mother-in-law had a sick relative and she disappears after a few chapters to go tend the relative and doesn't come back. But I knew I had to resolve this. So in book 2 is actually, Kaveri takes up a case that her mother-in-law asks her to take up. And so her mother-in-law is fighting with these conflicted feelings. She wants her to solve the case. At the same time, she doesn't like this idea of being known as Bangalore's most famous lady detective's mother-in-law. She doesn't approve of it. And so this tension and how they resolve their tension and a dog that comes in between is as much as I can tell you.
Oh, can't wait.
It's called Murder Under a Red Moon and it's under an eclipse night. So with this, I'll start. Yeah.
Okay, wait. Can you just hold on a bit? Lunita has the question. She has the mic.
Hi, Harini. Good evening. I would like to know, in your future books, will you have traditional recipes happening there?
Absolutely. So there'll be recipes. I'm now deciding the next set of recipes that will go into book 2.
Any special request, Lunita? Any recipe you'd like?
The typical Kannadiga recipes, which we would love to, copy and practice.
If you have suggestions, please tell me.
Definitely.
Well, congratulations on the book. I think it's a fantastic feat. Any book is such a beautiful work of art that's coming out. A technical question and a personal one. Technical as in, would you put this under historical fiction? Is this historical fiction? The personal one is, as an author myself, how much of you is there in the book?
So, okay, the historical fiction, yes, I would call it, because the historical setting is at least as accurate as I can make it. I have taken some liberties, but I've taken them more or less deliberately to fit my timeline, because it's a murder mystery at the end and I want to do certain things with it. So that apart, yes, I would call it a historical book. Yes. On the personal note, I don't know if there's anything of me in it, but there's definitely a lot of my family. I'd say Kaveri is an amalgamation of various aunts, grandmothers, my mother's experience, mother-in-law, various women that I wish somebody put together in terms of their combined life experiences. So that is definitely there. Yes.
It's wonderful to hear what you write about old Bangalore. And you also write about the Alsur Lake. I remember when we were children, my grandmother She had an old house on Wood Street, which is very close by, and she lost her husband very young. So one of the things she did was she had a horse and carriage in her backyard, which she hired around. And we used to go in this horse and carriage to Alsur Lake. And we were allowed to go on the island, a beautiful island, and there were boats there, run by, I'm not sure by whom. And it was such a delight to go down Alsur Lake, and we had our hands in the water and feet in the water, and a lot of fun in Alsur Lake. But after some time, we heard that the lake was highly polluted because of all the buildings around and there's sewage water coming in. And there was a naval chief, I forget his name, who was living in that area, and he was the one who cleaned it up. So can you tell us more about Alsur Lake and the condition of the lake now? Because I see no boating going on there except for the sappers.
Absolutely. So, okay, this has suddenly become very loud. So, if I think Alsur Lake is the only lake that exists in the heart of old Bangalore, cantonment Bangalore, that used to exist before. So when the British first moved to Bangalore and set up the cantonment, Alsur gave them their water supply. And the lake was twice as large as you see now. So it has now shrunk because all the army lands on the back used to be lake. And at some point they dredged and converted that into army areas. So that is a lake that was there. The Kensington Gardens area was there. This woman that I talk about throwing dung on the rock, I have seen in the 1980s. Yes, so she was there. And then they blocked that and then they fenced that off. As the army started taking over, as you say, I've also gone boating on the Alsur Lake, but they, the coracle boats, and then they had the other kind of motor boat, the pedal boats. But they stopped all of that because it did become very polluted after some time. And even now it has been restored and there's a local organization maintaining it. But really, without any flowing water, you can't keep a lake clean. And what has happened is because there was the connectivity with the Miller's tank, the water drained from here, Miller's tank, into Alsur, and from Alsur through a series of channels into Sankey tank. And now that you've lost the drainage on both ends, it's really stagnant water. And stagnant water is not going to be that clean. In India, any lake will get a little bit of sewage. And so that is really its challenge. It's not going to, it's very difficult unless you restore some of those waterways.
I have a question. So when you say Bangalore Detective Club, do more people join her?
They do, yes.
So
as the second book, you'll see a whole motley crew. There's a little boy who's a street urchin. There are more elderly ladies who join, and so Kaveri starts running this reading and writing workshop for women. So they join the Bangalore Club. There's a prostitute, and there is a policeman's wife, and there's a whole cast of characters that joins. So the club will grow from book to book. That's the way I imagine it.
So Uma and Mala continue to be part of that.
Yes, Uma and Mala very much part of it. Yes, very much. But it's a women's club. It's really very much. I mean, a couple of honorary men get membership, but it's mostly a women's club.
And what happens to Venu? Is he there in the next part?
He's also there. Yeah, all the favorite characters are going to be there in the next books. Yes.
See how attached we've got to the characters so fast.
That is so nice to see, exactly. So when I wrote the book, one of the most memorable things I should tell you. So I wrote the book and I had no idea who would read it. But my agent is also an old school friend. So I went to Bishop Cotton's in this side and St. Joseph's, all in this part of Bangalore, right? But my agent was also my best friend in school's older sister, was a year older than me in school. And she loves Bangalore like I do. So when I wrote the book, I thought it would be for a Bangalore audience. And I didn't think I was going to write for an international audience also. But the week it came out, it was featured in the New York Times as one of the best books to read. So that for me is very interesting. Engaging with readers in the US also, and in India and in the UK, who all like Kaveri but are seeing her differently because of their backgrounds, has been very, very interesting for me.
Any other questions?
No, just a mix of all kinds of people.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I just wanted to ask you if any of your lead characters in your book are of any resonance to your own personal life experiences, or does it resonate with you as an author?
I won't say directly any life experiences, but it's mixes of little bits of stories that I've heard from places. So for instance, I'm trying to think of, I knew Kaveri had to have a supportive husband because if you look at, there were extraordinary women in 1920s Bangalore. There was a coffee entrepreneur. There was Bangalore's woman journalist who launched the first ever magazine for women in India. There were all kinds of women that did crazy things. But all of them had either a supportive husband or a supportive father. And unfortunately, that was the reality of those times. You needed a supportive man. And I knew that would be Ramu. So it's partly those. But on the other hand, as you know, Ramu makes coffee for Kaveri every morning, and I've been married close to 30 years now. But I joke that we put it into our marriage contract because I'm not a good human being early in the morning. Let's put it this way. So till I get my first cup of tea, and my husband has to make that for me because I'm usually stalling till I get it. Right. So,
Thank you.
so
I'll
things
look
like
forward-
that will which will
I
come
look
in.
forward to a lot more of your books. Thank you.
Not every morning. Yeah, there are limits to what a 1920s man will do, which a 2020s man will do much more easily. Yes.
Good evening. I'm Sunny. Maybe I came late. I'm so sorry. Related to the author, detective. So that's why I came, but I was very late because of traffic jam. I'm so sorry. Author, I heard PIL and somebody talking about court, husband and wife. Yesterday, the High Court of Kerala said the guy went for a divorce. I want a very fantastic answer from you. The guy went to the High Court. He has 3 children. The High Court said, go out from here. I'm not giving you divorce. Because you have to think. He says, wife, he says the abbreviation of wife, but is invited forever. The judge said, no, wise investment forever. And the amount of divorce which is going on around, and both I'm a married, yes. So an answer from your side.
I'll take that as a comment and not an answer because I don't. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think book related or ecology related questions, please. Wait, you had a last reading? Should we conclude with that?
There's one.
There's one more.
We heard you mention that you are your audience has grown and diversified from Indian audience to the American and the UK. Normally, as a writer, one would write with a reader or audience in mind. And since you have this basket of audience, how do you resolve this in your day-to-day writing?
It is very hard. So I write for my beta readers, which is my daughter and my husband. And so I write a book that I like and that hopefully they like. And then what I do is I have excellent editors in the UK because they really do a very thorough job. So what they do is some things that, I mean, I completely take for granted and they'll ask me a question. So for instance, one of the questions I got was, why is Kaveri vegetarian? Can you explain? Maybe there was this incident in her life where she ate meat, but then she decided that it horrified her and so she became vegetarian. I said, no, she's always been vegetarian. And so they said, how does that work? So I had to write a little explainer for that, you know. So sometimes there's something like this that will come up with, they'll come up with, or can you do X and Y? And I said, no, that does not fit in this society. It just wouldn't work. So those are the back and forth kinds of things that we do. But otherwise, no, I can't write for that global readership. So otherwise, I worry that I would end up exoticizing it, and I don't want to do that. So I just write for 2 people that I know very well, that they like the kind of things I like, and I leave it at that.
Thank you. I like that answer.
It's a great question. No one's ever asked me this before. But it is something I struggle with. I mean, I struggled with in book 2 because it's the first time I realized I was getting these different questions.
You have a last short passage for us?
Sure. I will do one short passage about Ambujakshi. And,
yeah.
And I
So-
just wanted to show you the map. So if you can see this is actually based on a real old map of Bangalore from the 1890s. And it's drawn from that and with the little details of where Ramu's house is and where Ramu's boss, Dr. Roberts, lives and where Alsur Lake is, etc. And this to me was one of the fun parts of doing it, because I gave them the map and they redrew it in Art Deco style. And these are the kinds of things I love the UK editors, because they pay attention to this detail. They said it's the 1920s, and so you will have Art Deco motifs. And so the book, every chapter starts with this little motif, which is Art Deco, and the map itself is written in an Art Deco font. And I was thinking, that's attention to detail that I did not even think of. But Abu Jakshi, chapter 18. So this is chapter 19, the respectability of good women. And Kaveri and Ramu have just had a fight, and they don't fight much, but when they do, it's a bad one. Right? It had been a long time since Kaveri had thought of Ambujakshi. Yesterday, when Ramu scolded her for meeting Mala, she remembered her old friend with sadness. Poor Ambujakshi, she never had a chance. Ambu had been the best student in their class of 10 girls. She scored 100% in all their tests, wrote in perfect handwriting, was an expert veena player, did excellent handwork and embroidery, and was the pet of all the teachers. Much of Kaveri's facility with maths and numbers was due to Ambu, who spent hours with her. Ambu paid the ultimate price for her beauty, hard work, and talent. Her fame spread far and wide, and she became a much sought-after bride. Many prominent families approached her parents for an alliance, and she was eventually married to the eldest son from one of Mysore's wealthiest families, but she was just 14. Kaveri remembered with a twinge how Ambu looked the day she was married, like a gorgeous doll, dressed up in finery, her eyes large and stark with apprehension, her posture dull and submissive as she trailed behind her husband, stepping around the wedding fire. 2 years later, she was back in her parents' house, thrown out by her in-laws because she had failed to give her husband children. Of course, no one pointed a finger at her husband, even though they all knew that he was too drunk to be capable of fathering children and barely spent any time at home. Kaveri paced the room as she remembered the difficulty she'd had in trying to trace Ambu's address. Her elder sister had come for a visit, and Kaveri had managed to sneak over to her place when her parents were out, begging her for Ambu's address. Then she'd written a letter to Ambu. One day, when her father was in an especially good mood, she handed over the letter to him, placing her hands around his neck and leaning her cheek against him, pleading with him to post it to Ambu. His face had darkened, and he pushed Kaveri away, crumpling the letter into a ball and throwing it into the wastebasket as he left the room. Kaveri wiped her eyes and squared her shoulders. She was no longer 14, and Ramu was not her father.
So, in the end, is there any message you'd like to leave us with?
I think history is such a beautiful way of remembering the past, but I think it's also a way of inspiring us to think about what kind of future we want. And I just, yesterday I was writing to a woman from New Zealand who's an ecologist who's also a mystery writer, and we connected on a writers group. And New Zealand, in Wellington, New Zealand, they have this beautiful reserve called Zealandia, which used to be a dam. And what they have is a 500-year vision of the future, of how they want this reserve to look. And they have these little paintings that this is how it will look 100 years from now, 200 years from now, and 500 years from now. So I think this to me is what I want through this book. If you think of 100 years to the past, I want us to think to 100 years in the future. How do we want Bangalore to look like? And I love the city. I've lived so many places in the world and come back to Bangalore, and I would never leave it. And so I want to think of how does the city look 100 years into the future? And can we make it go back to the Bangalore of the past in some ways, in the beauty of the place?
Thank you so much, Harini. This has been an awesome session. Really enjoyed us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
I think I hand you all over to Shanti now.
Yeah, we come to the end of a beautiful eyebrow session. And I think our author of the day is a really fascinating person, from maps to ecology to water to crime mysteries, murder, mayhem, everything. A well-rounded personality and even more. Okay, so thank you, Harini. And also to Iona for bringing out those different aspects of the book. So to our club president, Mr. Ricky Patel, I hope he's here. Yeah, hi Ricky. For giving us all the support. And this eyebrow session wouldn't have been possible without the hard work of our eyebrow subcommittee. So to Vinita Tambuchetti, Rohini De Silva, Naomi Sequeira, Tony Francis, Vani Santosh, and of course our member in charge, Caroline Lobo, a very big thank you. So if you notice, you'll see the beautiful decorations around and on the table. And Jovita, yes, sorry, Jovita. I mean, the one and only, okay, yeah. So can we call upon our president, Mr. Ricky Patel, to come forward? We have a little memento for our guest of the day, author of the day. Harini, thank you so much. And to our moderator, Iona. Vicky. And thank you, audience. You have been really fantastic with all your questions. You have been really engaged. So we want you all to come forward for a group photograph. Okay, please come forward. Audience, all of you, please come forward. Thank you.